Hey! How you like these? I made these bags last night out of buckskin. Yeah, they're medieval bags. I double sewed the seams on them, and they have these 2,000-pound cordage straps and leather with sheep's-lined wool for shoulder pads. These are great. I love these things. They're so comfortable. I'm going to take one or two of them to my cabin. I got a couple more if anybody wants one. Not that I'm like trying to promote or, peddle them. I want to be accused of that. Someone's like, oh God, he's peddling leather bag. It actually takes quite a while to make those little suckers. They look really simple. I might edit that out of this video. This is a translator of ancient Pali, Romanized Sanskrit, former Brisha Rusko-Angliski Perewitchik, Russian English translator. Yeah, really good at translating languages. Said I was a prodigy, high school and college, taking college courses in high school. Not that that means anything. I hated college. It's fascinating. The top dozen or so most important words in ancient Egyptian are the exact same words in ancient Pali and Sanskrit. Isn't that fascinating? Like the word Aten, the solar absolute in ancient Egyptian. Interestingly enough, the word for that in ancient Pali, which I've been translating now for 25 plus years, roughly, is Aten. And in Sanskrit, it's super slightly different, essentially the same word, Atman, or Atma. Same word. Isn't that neat? We think that the ancient folks, since they didn't have cars and airplanes, that they didn't travel around, but there are these nice little calm periods, kind of like the period of ancient Alexandria, yeah, circa 400 BCE to 200 BC. It varies there. There's this expansive change, and I never am interested in discussing religion, but I'd like to brush upon it here briefly and talk about something. Like the Vedas, I know you're not familiar, you probably never read the Rig Veda, the Thura Veda, and the Sama Veda. Then we have a period very close to ancient Alexandria. Of course, the term Buddhism didn't exist until the 16th century. Gautama called his teachings, Samyutta Nikaya 5.4, he called them Brahmayana, or Path to the Absolute. It's nothing other than monistic monism. There's a Neo-Brahmanic movement extracting the true parts of THEURGY that had already been completely pooed over by ritualistic nonsense. In any translation in Pali, you run across Gautama traveling around the Magadha Valley that he traveled around, which is basically northeast, present-day India. He encountered all these sadhus and these people doing bodily austerities and all sorts of superficial, pathetic rituals, which is in no way, shape, or form conducive to wisdom and illumination. It's just not. This is the distinction, by the way. Religion is secularized metaphysics. I never want to really discuss religion. I'm only bringing up the topic now. That from this ritualistic, I'm trying to be very, very careful of the words I use. I was going to say trash. This ritualistic rubbish, nonsense, poppycock, things that are unconducive to wisdom, sprang forth all of the sudden in ancient India, as it did. Of course, Israel didn't exist back then, But say that Alexandria, the Greco-Roman area of the Mediterranean. The same thing happened in India as happened in the Greco-Roman area. Alexandria, the birth and the peace of Alexandria. And, of course, we have Alexander the Great, which traveled all the way to India, kind of to conquer the ancient world. But there's still peace and an enormous amount of trade. So this idea that there wasn't enormous amounts of contact between ancient cultures is completely ridiculous. The point I'm getting to, nobody talks about, and I'm not really seeing it in any YouTube video. Nobody seems to talk about this for whatever reason. It's incredibly important that we experience the same thing in the same time period, the same epoch in ancient India, Magadha Valley, as we do in what is at that time ancient Israel, the rise of Jesus, the ending of all these rituals. I don't know if you've read the Bible. People ask me all the time, like, have you read the Bible? So of course I've read the Bible. There's the Old Testament. There's this. Oh, there's so many silly rituals which are not connected to wisdom at all. It's about appeasing, some old guy up in the clouds, ritual after ritual, things that are actually quite heinous in the Vedas and in the Old Testament. Just heinous, ritual, superficial, the complete opposite of wisdom, which, I don't want to use that word, but the total opposite, the total antithesis of wisdom. Jesus did away with that stuff. Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, and I do mean original Buddhism. Those yellow-robed guys running around Southeast Asia, current-day India and Ceylon, they didn't exist until the 3rd century CE. They used to be called the Theravadins. They call them Theravadins. They used to call them Sarvastivadins, excuse me. Now they call them Theravadins. Complete reformation against all the ritualistic garbage, which is in no way, shape, or form connected to wisdom and illumination. True, genuine metaphysics. The teacher, by the way, of Plotinus was called Ammonius Saccas. Ammonius Saccas from Alexandria. There's an enormous amount of contact between ancient Egypt and India. The oldest writings in India are in Brahmi Prakrit and Pali Prakrit. There's pillar edicts of King Ashoka, and there's also 2 rock edicts. The Emperor Ashoka, 1st century, actually these are from the 2nd century BC, on a rock edict. There's the 13th rock edict. He talks about, and he was converted to Brahmayana, or what we call Buddhism today. His rock edict states the transmission of the teachings of Buddhism to the Hellenistic kingdoms to the west and to that of the Greeks and his dominions were converts of Buddhism. Even speaks specifically of one person. Conquest of the Dhamma has been won here on the borders, and even 600 yojanas. 600 yojanas is basically 9,500 kilometers away, where the Greek king Antiochus rules. Beyond there, the kingdom Ptolemy II, the ancient Egyptian king Ptolemy II. So in ancient India, some of the oldest writings found in India, they literally are, the rock and pillar edicts of King Ashoka. The only thing that's older than those are found on the funerary urns that contained parcels of Gautama's remains after he was cremated. Those are in Brahmi Prakrit. Same Prakrit that's found on the rock and pillar edicts of King Ashoka talks about what we call Buddhism being observed and studied 600 yojanas away, 9,500 kilometers, by King Ptolemy II of ancient Egypt. Likewise, in the south, among the Cholas, the Padyas, Tamarani, he has the 13th rock edict of King Ashoka. There's this transformation of the world when the world's calm. They didn't have movies back then. Yes, they didn't have cars, they didn't have airplanes, but there was a tremendous amount of movement of ideas, and especially philosophies. There was an incredible thirst among people for teachings of true wisdom, and it was itself worth far more than its weight in gold, far, far more. And they desired these things from one end of the ancient world to the other and back again. There's many books written, about the exchange of ideas. This is a great one called The Greeks in India. Tons and tons of references. Of course, Plotinus himself traveled to India. How far he made, we don't know. Of course, India didn't exist back then. His teacher, Ammonius Saccas, literally means silent. Ammonius Sakya, of course, refers to the Scythian. Sakyamuni is not a name like Sakyamuni Buddha. Sakyamuni means Scythian sage. Muni, sage or guru. Sakya, look up the Scythians if you don't know who the Sakya people were. Literally means the silent Scythian. The reason why he was Ammonius or silent is because he was a Neo-Pythagorean. The Pythagoreans were closed-mouthed about the teachings of incommensurability. They're famous for keeping their mouths shut and not spreading it far and wide. However, Plotinus did. Plotinus' teacher was Ammonius Saccas. Anyway, all these rituals of the Old Testament, were done away with by Christianity because this is not related to transcendence and revelation. The same is true of all the ritual, and this is very clear in any translation. All the rituals of the Rig Veda, Samaveda, and the Thura Veda, done away with. In Gautama's time, things had already become, people think, oh, that's ancient days, 2,500 years ago. But even in that time, the lost teachings were so hidden in ritual and nonsense. You had these Pharisee-like people of the ancient world, both of the Old Testament and of the Vedas, who performed silly rituals and goofy, superficial trash, which in no way confers wisdom and insight. So there's this age of enlightenment vis-a-vis a calm state in the world of ancient Alexandria, where there was an enormous amount of exchange of ideas and philosophies between ancient India, Greece, and Egypt. This is absolutely 100% undeniable. All of this happened, of course, in the same epoch between 600 BC to the 2nd to 3rd century CE, where Neoplatonism sprung up. Neoplatonism is a really ridiculous word. Neoplatonism is basically just a silly thing to refer to the original monistic monism of the Pythagoreans and the Platonists. It's just condensing things down. It's getting away with all the pomp and ritual and trash that has come up around it. You know, of course, we have the Bible, which contains the Old Testament and New Testament, of course, but we say, well, Jesus was a Jew. Of course, Judaism refers to a people, not a religion. And we have the same issue today where people say, well, that's Hinduism. You teach about the Atman. And I point out to them, when someone says Jew, they're not referring to Judaism and the religion. They're referring to a people. Hindu, not my opinion, this is a fact, doesn't refer to a religion. It refers to a people. Every time I say that, like an Indian will hear me say that in a video, and I've said it many times. They're like, oh my God, thank you. You're like one of the only Americans that knows that Hindu refers to a people, not a religion. People just don't get that. They'll say, oh, you talk about the Atman in original Buddhism. That's Hindu stuff. Like, Hindu refers to a people. There's no such thing. There's no book or a document that says the religion of the Hindus. It doesn't exist. That's not my opinion either. There is no such thing as a book, not the Bhagavad Gita, not the Vedas, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Arthura Veda. They say, this is the book of the Hindu belief. There is no such thing. It doesn't exist. It's not my opinion. It's a fact. And people are so confused. Anyway, it's just fascinating that nobody talks about this, that all these silly religious rituals, burning of incense, sacrifice this, stick it on the altar, and, do this number, and point the head towards the north as you take out the heart. You think we're talking about the ancient Mayans here, that, we're ripping out hearts, and, also, it is nearly the same thing. Not exactly, but pretty darn close. The Old Testament and of the Vedas. There's this thing recently in the news, and you could look this up. Type in 5 red heifers. There's a thing about the third building of the temple of on the Temple Mount, because it's been destroyed first by the Babylonians, second by the Romans. The third building of the temple is going to bring about the Savior, and to do that we have to have 5 red heifers that are perfect and have never been under the yoke or done manual labor. Cows, heifers, like moo. And they've been found in Texas. These perfect, and they're like a reddish brown color. They talk about the 5 red heifers, and they have to be, rip them open and do sorts of, and then they have to be burned. And then you purify yourself by rubbing the ashes. Look this up. I'm not making this up. You have to rub your ashes of the cremated heifers on your body for purification. And nobody knows what it means, but it is in there in the Old Testament. And so some entity has purchased a bunch of these red heifers that have never been under the yoke or done manual labor, because it says so right there in the Old Testament. They can never have been under the yoke. And then they were shipped over to Israel. I don't know what they're going to do with them. They're trying to fulfill an Old Testament prophecy. And I'm not saying anything about this one way or the other. What people believe is none of my business, even though this is all crazy, of course. So all these 5 red heifers, just do a Google search on that. Type in 5 red heifers. Just, I dare you, do a search on it. They're like trying to bring about the great return of the Savior. And don't you find it fascinating that during this time of peace in the ancient world, that all this ritualistic wackadoodleness, crazy, cuckoo, it just went away. We have Jesus in the New Testament, whatever you think about that one way or the other, and I'm not part of that. But that was done away with. All the rituals and all the ridiculousness. The same is true of the 10 billion trillion rituals that are found within the Vedas. Done away with. There is an extreme similarity between the end of the rituals of the Old Testament to Jesus as there is the rituals and the wackadoodleness of the Vedas to ancient Buddhism. And I said they actually called them Sakyaputa. The followers means sons of Sakya, i.e. Sakyamuni. It was called Brahmayana, the path to the absolute, if you want to call it a name, because that's the pre-sectarian corpus that gives it a name, Samyutta Nikaya 5.4. Don't you find that fascinating, the similarities there? Same is true of the Upanishads, the principal Upanishads. 95% of that ritualistic away with. By the way, during the last ice age, the Scythian people, Ukraine and even further north, they came down several rivers that dump into northern India. The primary character in the oldest Upanishad, by the way, you find this fascinating, you can look it up. I don't know if you think this name sounds Indian or not, but the primary character in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, his name is, tell me if this sounds Indian or if this sounds Scythian/Nordic. His name was Yajnavalkya. Just a simple question I'm asking you. You can look that name up, by the way. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the oldest Upanishad. Primary character, does it sound Indian? Of course, India didn't exist back then, I know. Talk about the Tamil people, really. Or the Hindu people, technically. Not a religion, a people. Does that sound Hindu, or does it sound Nordic? Primary character in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, his name is Yajnavalkya. Simple question, not a trick question. Yajnavalkya. You tell me what that sounds like to you. Anyway, so it's the end of ritualism. And all these, sacrifices, rituals, stand on your head and face the rising sun on the full moon, just all this ritual, because none of that stuff is conducive to. But we've degraded as a society to the point, these couple thousand years later, essentially, we've evolved back into rituals. People sitting on special cushions, burning incenses, putting little brass statues up on their mantles. They walk past the brass statues and what people believe is none of my business, but that is fetishistic, ritualistic, superficial, and in no way connected to theurgy, wisdom, illumination, insight, and understanding. No way whatsoever. So we've come full circle. It's gone from ritual to wisdom and insight, and we're back to ritual again. And that's why, wait for it, that's why we're in the Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga, girlfriend. Yes, we're in the Kali Yuga. Got Shiva the Destroyer right around the next corner. Shiva the Destroyer now has got critical mass plutonium and fissionable uranium. That's the new tool of choice for Shiva the Destroyer. It would be plutonium and uranium. Little joke there, even though that's not funny. The end of ritual, an age of insight. Now the age of insight is de-evolved back into the age of ritual. You can't deny it. Complain? I want to hear your comment. Let me know. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget about September the 24th. Let's see if something happens on September the 24th. Everybody keeps predicting something big's going to happen on September the 24th. Let's see. It's only a few days away. Let's see. I can't wait.